Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. Have you ever heard of a dog so loyal it risked everything for an unexpected bond? Deep in an untouched forest, a curious discovery awaited, a loyal companion surrounded by ominous black vultures, refusing to leave an old mysterious cage. What could possibly hold such a grip on this dog's heart? Stay with me as we uncover the truth behind Rascal's incredible journey and the secret that changed everything. The rescue party could not believe it when they finally found Rascal deep in the forest. The dog was sitting in a very big open dog cage and was surrounded by at least a dozen black vultures. This was strange in itself, but the weirdest thing was there seemed to be no way to get Rascal to move from his position. Only when they inspected the scene closely did they finally realize why this was the case. Even when the group had managed to pick Rascal up and away from the cage, he immediately returned to it the moment he got the chance. There was something that was just drawing the dog's attention so strongly, and the group had to figure out what it was. It was not easy, but the leader of the group, Matt, finally managed to get a look into the cage that Rascal was sitting in front of, and it was only then that he realized what was actually going on here. It took a lot of effort, but they eventually managed to get Rascal out of there. However, they ended up taking the cage with them, and in turn, the vultures as well. But why did Rascal not want to move from his spot? What was in the old cage deep in the forest, and why were the vultures surrounding it? Rascal, Miriam's beloved dog, caused a commotion in his owner's home by leaving for the forest unawares. After about 2 days of Rascal's mysterious disappearance, Miriam had no option but to seek the help of her town's residents to help search for the dog. Miriam was so desperate to find her dog that she purposed to do her best so Rascal could return back home. After much persuasion from Miriam, everybody in the town decided to go on a search hunt for Rascal. Unfortunately, after long hours of searching, no one found a trace of the dog. As a result of the vastness of the forest, the search looked unending, and the people began to lose hope as their search for hours seemed in vain. At the point when Miriam was about to give up completely, she came across a group of the search party made up of some of her closest friends. Miriam's friends tried to encourage her and express their enthusiasm about the search. They reminded her that they had packed up supplies that would last them for at least a week. The search party kept up with the search. Fortunately, after about 2 days, they came across some tracks and indications of Rascal's movement in the forest. The group doubled their effort and continued the search for hours. The further they went, the deeper they got into the forest before they realized they had gotten to parts of the forest that were less traveled by humans. This part of the forest barely had anything man-made. By the 3rd day of the search, the rescuers began to rethink their possibility of finding him. They felt the forest had enough predators which could have caused harm to Rascal. On the same 3rd day of the search, the group got another indication they needed to know the next route to take. The group came across black vultures that were moving in a circular motion above a particular spot in the forest. At the sight of the vultures, the group knew there was most likely a dead animal around that had called for the attention of the carcass-eating birds. They hoped the dead animal was a deer and not their much-loved Rascal. By the time they got to the scene, they were shocked by their discovery. At the scene, they saw about a dozen black vultures with no sight of a dead deer or anything dead. They didn't think too much of the old dog cage they saw because in front of the mysterious cage was Rascal. They heaved a sigh of relief after about 3 days of rigorous search. Rascal was found sitting calmly in the middle of the dozen black vultures they had earlier sighted. Rascal showed no sign of concern about the vultures he was surrounded with, so the group tried scaring off the vultures to approach the dog. Surprisingly, the group noticed as they moved closer to the birds that the vultures showed no sign of fear. Instead, they were ready to attack the group. Before the rescuers could blink their eyes, the vultures had turned against them, flying their beaks and claws in the group's direction. While the back and forth was going on between the vultures and the rescuers, Rascal sat down calmly in the cage and watched everything unfold before him. The people were amazed at Rascal's undisturbed disposition to the situation of things. The rescuers realized they needed a new approach to getting Rascal's attention. With their determination, they got another idea in no time. A member of the group reminded them of Rascal's favorite canned food they had brought along on the search. With the enticing smell that filled the atmosphere when they opened the canned food, they were almost certain they would get Rascal's attention. To their greatest surprise, Rascal remained where he was even after smelling his most loved food. This made a well of discouragement rise up in the hearts of the group. All their hope of the dog running towards them after smelling the food was dashed. They had no other option than to come up with another strategy to get Rascal's attention. Luckily for them, Matt, the unofficial leader of the group, soon came up with another idea. Without wasting much time, Matt executed the strategy. He took the can of food and threw it a few meters away from where Rascal was sitting. The action didn't catch Rascal's attention as they expected, but thankfully it caught the vultures' attention, and they flew towards it at high speed. Matt heaved a sigh of relief as he finally got a chance to approach Rascal. Matt thought he had succeeded in saving Rascal, but this would turn out to be very far from the truth, as Rascal was not going to be taken away willingly. The dog became very aggressive and even tried to bite Matt's arm. In the end, help from 2 other men was needed to keep the dog calm. When they finally got it done, they already had something else to deal with. By this point, the vultures had finished the cans of food and had noticed that Rascal was no longer in the cage anymore. The vultures flew in a large swarm towards the group, screeching and seemingly ready to peck their eyes out if needed. In fact, there was no other option than to put Rascal on the ground. If they were to run with the aggressive Rascal, either the dog would escape or the vultures would catch up to them really quickly. Before the birds had gotten to them, Matt decided to let go of Rascal. When the dog landed on the ground, it immediately ran back to the white cage and sat down in the exact same spot they found it. When Matt took a closer look, he saw that the vultures weren't actually following them at all, but were gathering around the cage again. The group was stunned. What's so special about that cage that it attracted all those vultures? Matt thought it would probably be better if they waited for a bit in the exact same spot they were right now. As night started to fall, Matt and the group decided to build a campfire. Since they had all had a very long day, they decided to take turns keeping watch. In this way, there was always someone who could keep an eye on Rascal and see if the vultures would go away. Matt's prediction was right, and it wouldn't take long before Rascal would fall asleep. He'd crawled a little deeper into his cage and put his head down. The vultures were a different story. Where Matt was right about the dog, he was wrong about the vultures. The exact opposite happened. The vultures just started to become more active at night. The only luck was that they didn't necessarily stay at the cage, but went a little higher up in the trees nearby. Matt thought they were most likely looking for food, but someone from the group said that vultures don't hunt at night at all. It seemed like they were kind of losing interest in the cage and Rascal, maybe because the dog was now asleep, or maybe because they were getting too tired themselves to stick around. Whatever it might be, it did present opportunities for the rescue operation. Matt and 1 other member of the group made sure they were ready for the perfect moment. They had 2 cans of food ready to toss a bit further from the cage so that they could clear a path between the vultures and Rascal. When there were only a few vultures remaining around the cage, they decided this was the best opportunity they were going to get. They opened the cans of food and tossed them on either side as far away from the cage as possible. "It's now or never," Matt whispered. As before, the vultures rushed toward the cans, and also some of the birds which had just flown away came rushing back towards the cans. The vultures began to eat head over heels and only had eyes for the food. The pair quickly but silently made their way toward the cage. Matt silently closed the cage door and lifted the cage up, all without waking up the sleeping Rascal. In the meantime, the group had already picked up their belongings and were ready to get out of there when Matt came back to their camp spot. They had made it out of there in time, and up until the sun started to come up again, the journey back was quite uneventful. With the sun peeking through the cage door, Rascal woke up and realized that something was happening. Now that it was light and they were away from all the vultures, they could finally get a good look at both Rascal and the cage. They took him out of the cage and inspected him for any wounds. He immediately became stressed again and seemed to want to go back to the cage. When they looked more closely into the cage, they saw some movement in the back of the cage. Matt saw some furry critters. He immediately thought of puppies, but when he looked more closely, he saw that they were some baby raccoons. Had Rascal been protecting these animals from the vultures? Was that the reason why he had not wanted to leave the cage? After a long journey, the group finally arrived in the town. On the one hand, they were happy to be able to bring Rascal back to Miriam, but they were also afraid of having to separate the dog from his new friends. Luckily, this would turn out to not even be necessary. Miriam was very happy to see her beloved dog again and hugged him for a long period of time. Tears streamed down her cheeks. When Matt told her about the baby raccoons, she couldn't believe her ears. Since she is a big animal lover, she wanted to see how things would go. With some advice and help from the local vet, she was able to keep the baby raccoons and is now raising them together with Rascal. She still cannot thank Matt and her other friends enough for all their help.